Welcome to the Teachers on Fire podcast, where I profile agents of growth and transformation in education today. Each guest shares their highs, their lows, their passions, their goals, and the resources that are shaping their thinking and inspiring their practice. For show notes and links from each episode, visit teachersonfire.net. You can also follow the show at Teachers on Fire on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And of course, please subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm your host, Tim Cavey. Let's meet today's guest. Today, I'm speaking with Riley DUECK. Riley is a 6th grade teacher in Surrey, BC, Canada. He's a second-year educator, speaker, innovator, blogger, and a co-host of the Not Many of You Should Become Teachers podcast. He's also a colleague, a personal friend, and a source of great inspiration. Follow Riley on Twitter at Mr. Riley DUECK and on Instagram at Riley Goldenboy. Riley, thank you so much for coming on the show today. Are you ready to talk education?
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's do it. Well, why don't you start by telling us a little bit more about your current context in education? And as I mentioned at the top, we are colleagues, so there's not too much that I don't know about it. But for our audience, what did I leave out?
Well, I work at a K-12 independent Christian school in Canada, located in Surrey, BC. I teach 6th grade, and I also enjoy coaching volleyball. That's kind of it for an intro. We'll kind of jump into the nitty-gritty or the passions and whatnot. But yeah, that's basically it.
Riley, I like to start with story time. So talk to us about a low moment or an experience of adversity that you faced somewhere in your teaching or education journey, still a young one, and describe how you overcame it.
So this is one of my favorite stories, although when I was thinking about sharing it on this podcast, I was like, oh, should I share the story? But sure, why not? But it was actually like probably almost exactly a year ago, because it was this took place right before spring break was about to start. And we, as a grade 6 team, we were having a little bit of difficult time maintaining student engagement as students were getting ready for spring break. And we even had a class party planned for like the last day of school, like the Friday before spring break. I think we were maybe going to the pool for half a day and then playing games for the other half. But um, we still had students that were quite overtly negative about what we were planning, and they thought that maybe pool party was really dumb and stuff like that. And they would rather just start their spring break early, like maybe they could just stay home, watch Netflix, do whatever it is that they want to do, instead of coming to school for a day that they didn't seem very useful. So I felt the responsibility that I had to kind of hype up these events, like just heighten the excitement. I'm a high energy guy, so bringing the hype it comes naturally. It's kind of actually one of the only like it's like top strength. I wouldn't put this on a resume, but bringing the hype, high energy, and as a result, um, student morale did seem to change. And I told them that we were going to play like a classic camp role playing game called Mafia, which they had played before, and they were like really excited to do that. And then, except for one student, I had a student that when I mentioned this, I was trying to like make it sound exciting, but they I don't want to use the word scream, but they were loud and they yelled no, like really loud. Like one out of 29 people in the room, this person is just being really rude, first of all. And I was so frustrated by the situation when I was trying to like, yay, everything's going to be great. And I'm such a positive person that when I hear this loud verbal dismissal, it was a little bit shocking, and I wasn't quite sure what to do with that. So I kind of had like a moment of pause, like thinking about like, oh my goodness, like what, like how could someone think about being so rude, so loud just at one point in time? But I became quite verbally frustrated back with my student. That was not probably the right response, but I also needed to let them know that they had been super rude, but also the general situation, the circumstances were weighing heavy, just feeling like I needed to, I don't know, bring the hype, and it just didn't meet expectations. But the school day was coming to an end, and things had calmed down a little bit, and I made sure you do that proper teacher thing. You come and chat with the student. This is the how I overcame it part. But just having that conversation with the student, the little follow up, it just shows how important this is, because the student was talking to me and like they were like kind of emotional and like not super happy, but it turned out that they were actually super excited for school on Friday because they were really excited to play the games, but they were leaving for their family vacation that night, like Thursday night, and they wouldn't be at school on Friday.
Oh no.
So they were just gutted. And I realized, like, oh, they still probably made a super rude comment, but it was because I actually had done a good job of bringing the hype. So I totally misread the situation. They weren't frustrated with me at all. They were frustrated that they were going to miss the class party. But yeah, it was it was quite something. But when he came back from spring break, he brought me this really cool little figurine and from China, and we were totally on good terms. And he had a great trip. Also, had a lot of fun.
That is hilarious. And that's just, I mean, that's just human nature, right? Sometimes we do misread situations and misinterpret student actions, and good for you to have that conversation. I mean, imagine what would have been lost if you never did connect with that student at the end of the day.
Oh, totally. Yeah, I even gave him some candy for his plane ride, but it wasn't until the very end that I realized, like, oh yeah, things are good.
That's awesome. Well, Riley, it's been a blast to connect with you as a colleague over the last 2 years. You've written some fantastic education pieces on the Teachers on Fire magazine on Medium. And definitely, if you haven't checked out Riley's stuff there, take a look. He's done some awesome stuff in different areas, including assessment. I've enjoyed listening to you speak in different settings, and I know that one of your core passions is the authentic integration of faith and learning in the classroom. That is supporting the growth of faith in organic forms that vary greatly from what we think of when we talk about, quote, institutionalized religious education, right? So, talk about this passion a little bit. Where does it come from? And the bigger question, why do you think faith belongs at all in the landscape of K to 12 education?
Yeah, oh boy, institutionalized religious education that has some terrible colonial connotations, just all a bit of a mess. But that's quite a question. I think it's not like a hidden thing, but I work in Christian education. I'm a Christian person, so I'm familiar with this setting. I'm even a graduate. I did K to 12 in Christian ed, so um, it's not something that is unfamiliar territory or uncharted territory. And I've been invested in these conversations for a while. Like when you're in high school or when you're in middle school in Christian ed, like you are talking about like the different things that might be different from someone else's school or whatnot. It's just a part of the conversation. And then since I've left high school, I have been invested in theological conversations and faith formation. They're things that I care deeply about. But I think like going a little bit deeper into my context helps me kind of unpack this question. So when I was completing my practicum, I worked at an inner city school with many students who came from vulnerable situations. And I learned a lot while I was working there. And I really thought that I had found my calling. I saw so much love for the poor in spirit embodied in that school. And it felt like something that I really needed to continue to be a part of. I felt so passionate about it. I had an amazing there was an amazing admin team working at that school. There was an amazing school associate that I was partnered with, and I just felt like, oh my goodness, like this is really where I'm supposed to be. I'm supposed to be continuing to work with these students. So honestly, Christian education, where families will pay tuition, was not on my radar of work. I really felt like I was called to be with students who maybe couldn't pay for groceries, let alone tuition. But long story short, there's a lot that went in there. There's probably months of work and a summer and thinking about who I am and what I'm supposed to do. So long story short, when I applied for fall postings, I threw my name into a lot of job opportunities and kind of came up short every time, which was kind of shocking considering that there's a teacher shortage at the moment. There's lots of positions. I actually, when I look back, I think I only got one call back, and it was for temporarily teaching grade 5. I think it wasn't even until Christmas, and the relational teacher in me really couldn't. I gave that job offer a hard pass. I couldn't feel like I could attach myself to a group of students for a short amount of time and leave. So while I was waiting for calls from schools, I'd been pestered by a friend and a mentor who works at the school that I currently teach at and the school that I actually attended for K to 12, and they were desperate for a full-time grade 6 teacher to start as soon as possible because their current teacher had resigned the Friday before school began. And I was almost rude in rejecting the offer. Like I was really short with this person, and I felt really bad because they were almost emotional. And you get it. Like if you care about the school that you work at, and then you see that there's going to be a group of kids, like there's no teacher for this, like your heart breaks, and you're wondering how on earth am I going to solve this problem? So this person was very passionate, a little bit emotional, and I was not super kind. I was trying to figure out a way out of this because I really felt like it was not the place where I was supposed to be. But those conversations I started to ponder these things in my heart, if you want to use that rhetoric. But I started to think things over, and I actually came up with a couple of conclusions that were more interesting than I thought originally. When I thought like this is not the place for me, but I thought about how invested I was in theological conversations and how that could engage with my line of work, that those things could be fused working at a Christian school. So my interests and giftings may actually lend themselves to teaching the Bible, to discipling students, and teaching in a way that's authentically Christian, which is I recognize that as a cool opportunity. The next thing was that I actually could use, and this is probably the biggest thing for me teaching right now, is using my previous K-12 experience as an in for teaching Christian ed students. A colleague of mine named Dave, who was on your podcast, Dave McFarland, we talk about being able to speak the language. So I had literally been in their shoes. I'd literally been in the classrooms that they had been in because I attended that school. So I really did speak their language. So having that in was definitely like, oh, maybe this would be a interesting spot. Like it would give me one step up as I attempt to teach these students and work alongside them. And then finally, there were two fun ones that I'd be able to help coach the volleyball team that I originally played for, and then also take opportunities to travel the world through the school's international outreach initiatives, leading teams of high school students. And after pondering those things, here I am. I accepted to work in Christian education despite years, like ever since I graduated from high school, thinking like that this would not be a good place to be. Um, but I recognized that my strengths lended themselves to this position that I now work in. And also I also started to recognize the role of the Christian school in a little bit different way. It's not just like there's a bit of a caricature, and maybe to some extent, like depending on where you go, it might not be a caricature. But like for me, I've realized that it's kind of uh, a false view of the Christian school, that it's just supposed to be better education or higher achieving students. And I've realized that's really not the call and the mission of what Christian education is supposed to be like. It's if you want something like that, there are university prep schools or different private education that could interest someone. But for me, the role of Christian education or the role of the Christian school is to provide Christian education. And when I signed on, so when I realized I was doing something so different than what I had planned to do, I was committed to honing that opportunity to explore what it means to teach in a Christian way and to keep that as my primary vision for my practice, and recognize that that's a high calling. And I don't want to lose track of that high calling as a teacher. And every day I have the opportunity to use learning experiences to direct students into loving their neighbor, to help students recognize their peers as valuable humans that reflect the image of God and identify like God as the king of their lives. So, and using learning as the vehicle for those things. So, and then also recognizing that that's what the tuition's for. It's actually not for university prep. Like that's not my mission as a teacher or whatever it is that you want to do. So all those things together, I think I maybe have kind of forgotten what question you even asked me, Tim, but I think you asked me where my passion comes from. And that's where my passion comes from, is recognizing what my mission now is here, working in this school. And then it's totally sustained when that idea is too easily forgotten. It's a beautiful thing to be a part of a profession that uses student learning to dive deeper into each student's life on a spiritual level and shape them in that also. So I'd say that that's a beautiful thing, and that's part of the reason why I'm so passionate.
Wow, fantastic, Riley. That was really nice to listen to and fun to hear about your journey. Just the fact that you were so resolved for, what was it, 5 years after high school, that no way would you go back into an independent setting. You were bound for public, and we love our public schools, of course. I think one of the questions, and maybe I'll go a little bit off script here for a second, but I think one of the objections that comes along sometime is this idea, and I want to tread carefully through this, but this idea that faith-based schools sort of cultivate a very judgment-focused view of the rest of the world or the secular environment. And I think you would agree that, in fact, a faith based orientation, or you use the word discipleship, when we talk about discipling our students in a vibrant relationship with Jesus Christ, that can actually orient us in a very different way, in a very compassionate way toward our world. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And to speak to the connotation of judginess and whatnot, like I think if you look at like most polls on like what people think about Christians, judgmental is like one of the first things, which
Right.
Christians are like, what? How could that be? And I Jesus rejects judgment in that way, which is so interesting. But just to use an example, like in my Canadian context, Indian residential schools, that was Christian education. Like those
Right.
schools were First Nations people were abused and horribly mistreated. That is that an example of Christian education? Like, so to see that that's the overtone of, to some extent, the work that I'm in, and to reject that as a Christian, to, well, not to reject that it didn't happen. Sorry, that sounds like I'm a conspiracist, but like to try and hone what it means to be an apprentice of Jesus Christ in education, and recognizing reconciliation as one of those virtues, and that there are great misdoings and wrongdoings that have taken place in the name of Christ, and like through Christian education, quite literally, when you look at the residential school issue. So yeah, I totally see why some people would say like, oh, Christian education, but I don't know. I also see that there's a call. It's a high calling to like, I don't know, to make things right again and whatnot. So yeah, I don't know if that really answers your question to some extent, but
No, it totally does. And something that's come up in a few of my recent interviews are the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. I don't know if you're familiar with those, but I believe it's a list of 17 goals that, we're talking about reducing world hunger, improving education, justice systems, and so forth. And all of those things, I think, fit so neatly into a vibrant Christian or biblical worldview. And so I think we need to speak strongly sometimes, or more clearly maybe, as faith-based schools, and say, look, this is not about developing some kind of exclusive club or superiority complex at all. It's in fact quite the opposite, that we view every human being as someone with inestimable value, someone who is sacred and created in the image of God, and we want to make a difference in our world for the good. And so all of those R words of restoration and renewal come into mind, because that's really our focus. And it's not about, again, we talked about the word judgment, and I use the word exclusive. And I think sometimes those are some of the notions that come up. So,
yeah, even if I could just add two things to that, the sustainable development goals are basically in the grade 6 BC social studies curriculum, which I teach, which is really interesting. And then recognizing that, like, yeah, all these things really are about life to the full. Like in the scriptures, it talks about how Jesus comes to bring life to the full, and where we see the world as it is, and then recognizing the world as it should be, and that these development goals are bringing that renewal and whatnot, that making things new again, which is it's a Christian promise.
so good. Well, we could talk for hours on that. But speaking of talking for hours, we need to talk about your podcast. You've got a podcast called Not Many of You Should Be Called Teachers, which I always find a really interesting name. It sounds very, in a sense, discouraging, but I know the backstory behind the name. So you mentioned David McFarland, your co-host, who I interviewed in episode 43 of Teachers on Fire. And the interesting thing, of course, is that at the time that I interviewed David, the podcast was not yet in existence. And of course, you were not yet on staff. So this is sort of the other side of the creation of the podcast. Talk about the backstory, first of all, on the title. You got to explain that title. And then tell us about your why. Who should tune in and what should they expect to hear when they do?
Okay, yes, the podcast, and yes, Dave McFarland. Um, we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but I love creating stuff. I think podcasting has become my new favorite medium for doing things. I used to like YouTube, but podcasting is just a little bit more simple. I don't need to do my hair and look beautiful like YouTubers do, and I get to just chat with people like you, which is really cool, Tim. But I mentioned earlier that my passion for faith and learning is sustained when our mission as Christian educators is all too easily forgotten. So, like, we really exist to further the conversation, to continue the conversation. So, to just go back to the title of the podcast, it's not many of you should become teachers, and it actually is a quotation that some may or may not know, but from the Christian scriptures in the letter written by James, it talks about that not many of you should become teachers because we who teach will be judged more strictly. And it's funny, you said it's very discouraging. It is, if we think about it, yeah, it sounds discouraging. And it's not meant to be a fear-mongering tactic, but it is a bit of a reality check. Teaching is a high calling and it has a grand responsibility. So it's only necessary that we ask ourselves, what are we even doing here? Or why are we doing what we're doing in any teaching situation? And I would say, especially in Christian teaching, considering that it's a part of our scriptures. So, um, like I said, the podcast is meant to start and further conversations around Christian education, because and kind of to get rid of that false view that Christian education is just supposed to be really good. I don't know, like to use like the traditional education stuff, like really high grades, really well performing students that we're actually called to something higher than that. So to really remind ourselves of those things and to jump in. And most of our listeners are from teachers at Christian schools, but we also have engagement from pre-service teachers that are going through their practicum and whatnot, university instructors, and a handful of Christian teachers who are working in public school districts. And sometimes this conversation becomes stagnant in Christian teaching circles as we get caught up in other edu conversations. And we're teachers, so like I can't blame us for talking about teaching, right? So um, Dave and I, we want to sustain like a bit of a holistic exploration of what it means to be Christian teachers and looking at everything and seeing how our faith permeates what it is that we do. Also, there's just not plain enough Christian education conversation on the internet. So we want to connect with others who have had a more grounded, or so that we can have more grounded conversations. It's sometimes it's quite baffling to find out that there's nothing on the internet. And as we come across other people that we have met, it's like, oh my goodness, it's like we've struck gold when we find someone on Twitter that this is one of their takeaways or something that they're diving into and whatnot. So yeah, just to kind of cap it off, like we say that we're skeptics and not cynics. So I think that there is a lot of cynicism that could be done with education in general, but with Christian education, and a lot of these faith and learning conversations are either like overly intellectual or a little too airy fairy. So we try and be reasonable and we try and be grounded. Like in a lot of education, there's fluff that you can find, and you can find it in Christian circles also. So we do our best to avoid empty words, but also stay clear of being cynical. Um, like I said, we're skeptics, so we like to process everything that's involved in these faith and learning conversations and not jump to being too prescriptive.
So, and I've enjoyed many of your conversations, many of your episodes. For those in public settings outside of Christian or faith-based settings, would you still invite them to listen? Do you think people in those public or secular contexts would still find value?
I'd say absolutely. Like, there's definitely going to be a handful of episodes where we're literally talking about overt faith formation. Like, you wouldn't have a chapel service in a public school where we do in a Christian school. So episodes that have to deal with that, maybe there would be little to no connection. But when it comes to seeing the image of God in our students and reflecting who we are as Christians, and then making learning opportunities as vehicles for loving our neighbor, those are things that are, I was going to use the word international. That's not what I'm trying to say, but they are universal. That's what I'm trying to say. They're universal across teaching practices.
There we go. Well, Riley, one of the reasons I've so enjoyed working with you is your love for creating content, whether it's vlog content on YouTube, podcasting, blogging, and other forms of creation. So let's park there for a moment. And by the way, I have to say, I'm very excited now to finally have a MacBook Pro, first one in my life. So I'll be coming to you for advice on how to use GarageBand and Final Cut Pro and so forth. But let's talk about creative activity. In your view, why are creative processes such an essential part of K-12 education today, both for educators and for learners?
Yeah, oh boy, I love GarageBand and Final Cut Pro like a lot. It's funny that why are they so important? Like when I think about my high school experience, like my experience in my media classes specifically were so influential. Like so much of what I do now, that's just, well, you could call it hobbying or just creating, is so it's mirrored from what I learned in high school media classes, whether that's doing YouTube videos or even editing a podcast. Very similar skills and whatnot. Even had the opportunity to go in high school on a trip to Uganda to learn documentary filmmaking and whatnot. So all those things have deeply influenced what I'm doing now. But why is it so essential or important? It's, for me, it's twofold. The first is simple. If I don't know if you're familiar with the Enneagram, but I am a 7 and I'm all about fun. It's just a fun thing to do. Creative processes are fun. I think some people don't find them fun, but I think the ones that often don't have a great fear of failure, which I'll talk about later, or maybe a deep one that maybe isn't fully fleshed out, but just deep inside them. That's something that would be fearful. But I always think that trying something new is really fun. Some people would disagree, but creating thing is a great way to try something new, share something you've made, and start a conversation. And all those things are just high on my interest list. So I find that as a very fun thing. And I think if we can cultivate high engagement in these creative processes, so many learning opportunities become more fun and become more engaging. And I think it's that joie de vivre that makes our learning stronger and our lives better.
Hmm.
The second has to do with just a life skill of learning from our mistakes, from not being afraid to fail. You can pop Carol Dweck's growth mindset title in here. But the ability to learn from mistakes is what's created successful people all over the planet for all of human history. And the best part is that I think that it doesn't really need to do with finding success, maybe. Like we talk about how, I don't know, Thomas Edison failed so often in making a light bulb, and then he made the light bulb. But I also I sometimes avoid a bit of a hero complex with my students because like I want to empower them, but I also want to be reasonable. Some people, I might get a lot of flack for saying something like that, but just so many of our interactions in life are to do with making mistakes and learning from them. Could be relationships, could be social, whatnot. So it doesn't need to do with like solving world hunger. It could just be with the way that you treat your friend or whatnot. And those are transferable skills. So I don't see a better way to learn this learning from mistakes other than the baptism by fire that creative processes give you. So I do encourage people to write, draw, public speak, which is my personal favorite, and create. So yeah.
It's never been easier for educators to share their voice. And then going back to you touched on this, but going back to the context of the learner, of today's student, I mean, you'll never get higher engagement than when kids are making stuff, right? I mean, that's a completely different mindset than simply absorbing information. And so, yeah, I love that you are into the creative work. And I look forward to continuing to learn alongside of you, Riley. Well, as you look across your PLN and your own practice, we've already touched on some really big pieces of your practice, but what else is setting you on fire about education today?
I love teaching math. And I love, which is funny, I think that there's probably a really interesting faith and math conversation somewhere in the world that people have yet to truly tap into. But I love teaching math, and anything by Robert Kaplinsky just blows me away. You can go to robertkaplinsky.com. I do not know this person personally, just a bit of a little edu celebrity here that I really look up to. And he's a math teaching genius. And anything in my class that can be problem based has become problem based because of how I've watched him create these high engagement math problems. They're super low floor, like anyone can jump in, and their high ceiling because of the depth that they bring. So I've changed so much of my teaching practice, like my activities that I do with my students, and even my assessments and my math tests. Really, like, I've totally avoided as much rote computation as possible to jump into some serious problem solving. So that is the thing that's setting me on fire right now, and that's another creative practice too, is to see some of these cool things that he is creating for math problems and thinking about, okay, what can, because there's only so much that he's got on there. If I need to try and jump into a different topic or something that we're learning, what can I create to also mimic a same low floor activity that we can go deep into and then also maintain lots of fun and high engagement.
I feel like I have a long way to go in the whole area of teaching math. I'm reading some Joe Bowler finally, and I look forward to getting more into Robert Kaplinsky. I know the sixth grade teaching team at our school there's a lot of good math conversations going on, aren't there?
Well, I was even going to say that you should share some more Joe Bowler at our next No Pressure Book Club that we have. I would love to hear some more.
That's right. Well, I happen to know that all of our teaching team have set these professional goals for this year. So I have no idea what yours is, or apologies if you shared it publicly and I've forgotten it completely. But would you mind sharing what your professional goal was for this year and maybe talk about how that's coming, or talk about a project that you're currently working on?
Yeah, well, a couple of professional goals, and as life goes on, and they shift a little bit as to how you focus on things. But at the moment, so much of our curriculum in British Columbia is meant to integrate First Nations culture, content, perspectives, and pedagogy. So I think reconciliation is a brilliant Christian virtue. So my goal is to see how I can grow as an educator in the area of indigenization. I was lucky to have an absolutely brilliant school associate in my practicum year who sparked some passion in me to continue to bring First Nations perspectives into my class. And I'm just learning to grow and continue to do so as we reflect on Canada and who we are as a nation, that First Nations history is a part of our history and it deserves a spot. So continuing to, yeah, just bring reconciliation, which is cool.
Riley, outside of education, what's another area of learning for you? What is it that ignites your passions when you leave the classroom and really brings you alive as a human being?
Yeah, I'm not sure if this counts, but I love travel and tourism and the leadership that comes with stuff like that. I think if I wasn't a teacher, I would definitely be a tour guide. For the whole calendar year of 2000, I think it was 2018, I was leading tours with an Airbnb experience in downtown Vancouver, and I loved every minute of it. So I'm not sure if you could call it a hobby, but a lot of my free time is used to research the next place that I can go to and how I can maximize my travel credit card far enough to get me there. So I absolutely love to travel. I was recently even on a school trip to Uganda where I co-led a team of 9 high school students, and I loved everything that went into the leadership learning curve of guiding that team, whether that is dynamics with the students, but then also the organization and logistics of what it takes to get us there, all of the above, and then engaging with culture on top of it, just all of the above. Just, yeah, that sets me on fire for sure.
No, I know a lot of teachers are nodding their heads about the travel, and I think that is so cool that you actually offered your tour guide services through Airbnb. And I just think now that Vancouver finally offers Uber, you need to eventually maybe consider hopping on that as well, and educating some visitors to Vancouver about some of our local landmarks and hotspots. Well, Riley, we're about to move into your quick picks, but just before we do, I want to spend a moment talking about productivity. So, do you have a personal habit, an app, a routine that you go through that contributes to your success and really allows you to get it all done?
Oh, Tim, this is so funny because I have this love-hate relationship with productivity or self-help. I think some people don't like the term self-help, but I just see all the books and I see all of them, and I just wonder like which one works. There's so many of them. I think it actually maybe shows us how much we don't know because of how many books there are. However, I love Gregory McKeown and his book Essentialism. This I normally tire of some of the stuff that I hear, but I thank his work for so much of my life joy, and part of that is because I am someone who spreads thin easily, and I'm learning how to say no more often to make the essentials or the things that I've really chosen and committed to in my life to be stronger and more fulfilling. So I would recommend his book Essentialism. I listened to the audiobook about a year ago, and it's just been a really powerful opportunity for me, or powerful experience.
Is it fair to summarize essentialism as sort of a minimalism of activities?
Let me just get the sub here. Could I read the subtitle? So it's the disciplined pursuit of less, and essentially the thing that came up again over and over was that how we can be more effective and more productive by doing less, and then that eventually manifesting in more results or whatever it is that it is we're doing.
That makes a ton of sense. Riley, it is now time for your quick picks. And here we want to know the education voices and resources that are shaping your practice and inspiring your thinking today. I know in some of these cases, some of these questions, it's hard to narrow it down to just one or two, but let's take a stab at it. Starting at Twitter, tell us about someone we should follow there and share why they've been inspiring you lately.
Yeah, it is hard to narrow it down to two, but it was this. The first one's super easy. Is Toby A. Travis is a superintendent of Village Christian School in North Carolina, and this is one of those people that I like stumbled across, and I was like, oh my gosh, like someone who actually cares about Christian education. Look, and they're tweeting about it. This is amazing. So he's the type of guy that shares such a grounded vision for what Christian ed is supposed to be like. So I got a lot of respect for the way that he's leading his school. And then small second one is David McFarland. Got to throw him in there, which is at Mr. McF. At Mr. McF teaches. So he's good on teaching, current events, social studies, faith and learning, all of the above. He's a great follow.
I've got Dave, Mr. McF teaches on instant notifications, and so he's been a great source of coronavirus news for me lately, and he's been keeping on top of all the latest developments. So a shout out to you, Dave, and of course, Dave is about so much more than the news cycle, but a lot a lot of great insights, and I look forward to checking out to Toby A. Travis as well. Riley, point us to an ed tech tool that you currently love using in your classroom or your professional practice.
I feel like this is so boring to say, but as it continues to evolve, Google Classroom just continues to wow me. I love designing well scaffolded Google Doc assignments and then just handing them out with a click of a button. So, and thanks to you, Tim, I now include Bitmojis for some added flair.
Well, Google Classroom is going to get a lot of work, I think, as we sort of redefine what education looks like in our K to 12 context. I know many schools I see on Edu Twitter and Facebook that many schools are moving for the first time into Google Classroom. And if you are listening and you have some questions, one person I would point you toward is John Sowash of the Chromebook Classroom. Great friend and phenomenal resources on his website and YouTube channel. So make sure you check him out. Riley, recommend a book, one that you've been reading lately, or perhaps one of your all-time faves, and tell us why you recommend it.
So I read almost exclusively theology and children's literature. My two favorite interests, kind of bizarre, but I'll recommend one of each. So the first one is The Day the Revolution Began by N.T. Wright, or anything by N.T. Wright for that matter. And then the other would be Restart by Gordon Korman, or anything by Gordon Korman for that matter.
Well, and I want to thank you for the Gordon Korman recommendation. I've been enjoying reading through that one at bedtimes with my 8th grader. It's such a great book. I'm really enjoying it.
Made me cry.
Yeah, it's a good one, and I should say too, it's a great book for bullying and just changing the culture of a school. If that is perhaps an issue in your context, it doesn't happen to be in my particular class this year, but if you're listening and that you're looking to change some culture, looking for a good read aloud in that category, check out Restart by Gordon Korman. Well, Riley, my theory is that every podcast producer started out as a podcast fan. So talk to us about some podcasts that you're listening to right now.
Uh, well, Teachers on Fire, obviously. Two others apart from the Teachers on Fire podcast is This Cultural Moment, which is by John Mark Comer and Mark Sayers. Really good cultural commentary, really interesting stuff. And then Ask NT Wright Anything with NT Wright and Justin Brierley.
2 more questions, both about video. Tell us about a YouTube channel that you're into right now and one that we should subscribe to.
Oh boy. I love PewDiePie. I absolutely do. I followed the whole T-Series thing and it was unreal, but I would drop almost anything to watch an episode of Pew News. And PewDiePie is having been in Africa for a while, coming back to a bunch of PewDiePie videos is just making everything a little bit nicer.
Okay, so explain that for me a little bit. I've seen a couple of videos, and I mean, you and I are coming out of, let's be frank here, different generational tendencies or whatever. But I mean, explain the PewDiePie thing for me.
So the first thing I guess like that I enjoy because I'm not really a gamer like people enjoy video games. I actually probably would skip those videos like he'll play Minecraft and stuff like that. I really don't enjoy that. But I do think that he does have I think first of all I'd say I think he's really smart. So he actually reads like classical literature almost exclusively. So he's a real bookworm and a real brain and because of that which is funny. You'd think like that's not what the channel is about at all, which is true. Because of that, I feel like he is such a good commentator on what's going on in the world, and like a good political cartoon, he does it through the vehicle of memes, and some of those have little to no commentating value, but then the ones that do make me snap my fingers and go, that's really good. So, and on top of it, I just think some of it's just hilarious. So, it ticks all my boxes.
Last question, Riley, strictly for fun and maybe never more relevant than this particular episode of the program where so many teachers are sitting at home quarantined these days. What are you watching on Netflix right now?
So I just got rid of my Netflix subscription in January-ish. And for a number of reasons, I will resubscribe when Stranger Things 4 shows up, but I will go old school and say that I am loving Survivor Season 40, which is on CBS, I guess, which is called Winners at War. And if I'm not doing that, well, right now there's no sports, but I would be watching Tottenham Hotspur on DAZN.
All right, okay. And I heard you say Survivor Season 40. That's just blowing my mind right now that it's actually been around for 40 years. Is that correct?
It has been around for 20 years, 2
Oh, okay,
seasons a year.
okay, all right. Thank
Yeah.
goodness. Okay, wow. No, that made no sense at all. I can't believe I said that. Okay. Riley, you bring such a diverse and interesting package to the education conversation. For those looking to connect with you and hear more, perhaps from the podcast and from everything else you're putting out there, what are the best ways for the listeners to connect with you?
Well, Twitter is probably number one. That's at Mr. Riley DUECK. And then the other place you can find Edu Twitter is at Not Many of You. That is the podcast Twitter. So those are some good places to connect with me. I also have a website, RileyDueck.com. I have a YouTube channel that I used to use that I upload occasionally, which is just my name, Riley DUECK. And then I do have an Instagram, which is Riley Golden Boy, which was a fabulous Instagram handle when I was in high school. But now every time I've heard you say it out loud, Tim, I become more and more self-conscious about my social media choices.
I mean, you got to stick with your brand, I guess, right? But no, there's always room for more accounts. Riley, this has been so much fun. Thank you so much for sharing your time with the podcast today. This has been, let's say, a long time in coming, and I know our community will enjoy this conversation, and of course, my broader audience, I think, will find it very interesting as well. Take care, and hey, whatever the future holds for online education, good luck with that, and I know we're going to learn from each other going forward.
Thank you, Tim. This was a real pleasure. Thank you so much.
Before we sign off today, I'd like to share a few things from the Teachers on Fire community this week. My first stop is on Twitter, where in response to episode 134, my conversation with Jesus Huerta, Francois Nodia at super_teacher_F tweeted, "Great episode, loved the 3D prosthetics that the kids built. Well done, super teacher. Also, great resources for every teacher to use. #ZAEDU. Well, thank you for that, Francois, coming all the way to us from South Africa. I have to agree with your assessment of this episode with Jesus, and I continue to appreciate your support of the podcast. It's been super fun to follow along with you on Instagram stories as well. To all who have read, viewed, liked, retweeted, commented, or replied to my content, thank you. You are the fuel to my fire, and I so appreciate your support. And if I missed replying to you, I apologize. I was on vacation for the last 10 days or so with my family in Hawaii. It was beautiful there, and I did get a little disconnected from the social media. Not a bad thing once in a while, I'm sure you'd agree. If you are looking for some reading, make sure you drop by the Teachers on Fire magazine on Medium, where Kelly Christopherson has been a writer on fire lately. His articles have included Finding Your Voice, See the Possible in Others, Sharing Your Voice, That's the Beauty, and This Past Week Has Been Difficult for Everyone. That's a lot of writing. Good job, Kelly. Dr. Deborah M. Vereen published a piece called My Virtual Library Remains Open. Debbie Tannenbaum wrote Challenge Accepted, co-hosting a Twitter chat. Caitlin Giordano published Teachers, Feel Your Feelings. And I wrote Ohana, a Hawaiian prescription for education communities. The Teachers on Fire magazine is a Medium publication, and you'll find it on medium.com or on the Medium app. If you're currently in quarantine, why not begin some education writing? It's easy to create a Medium account using your Google credentials, and from there just send me a note to let me know that you would like to submit work to the Teachers on Fire magazine, and I'll get you started right away. Of course, you keep full credit and ownership of your content on Medium, and the Medium platform compensates you based on the engagement and read time your articles earn. That's always encouraging. Message me at Teachers on Fire on any social media platform for more details. I will leave you with this quote from my reading, Teachers on Fire. It comes from a book called Culturize, Every Student, Every Day, Whatever It Takes. And it's written by Jimmy Cassis. You'll find him on Twitter at Cassis_Jimmy. And he writes, to effect change, we must be honest with one another and ourselves. We must be willing to reflect on our own leadership. Again, I'm your host, Tim Cavey, and I'm so grateful that you decided to spend some of your day listening to this podcast. I hope that in some way the content you heard from Riley DUECK ignited your thinking and inspired your practice, and I'll meet you next week right here on the Teachers on Fire podcast. Wherever you are, stay safe, stay healthy, keep learning, and I'll connect with you again soon.